To frack or not to frack? Next on Wyoming Chronicle. Hello, I'm Richard Ager. Welcome to Wyoming Chronicle. The process of hydraulic fracturing, also known as fracking, has the power to cut through rock to liberate enough natural gas to help win the fight for American energy independence. It also has the power to divide communities across the nation, as those concerned about fracking's environmental impact confront others pushing for the promise of greater economic development. Here in Wyoming, the dimensions of that fight have been front-page news, and the average citizen is often left trying to sort out who's right about fracking.
You can get a glass of water at Jeff and Rhonda Locker's house, but you can't drink it. It's been that way for over 10 years.
We had really good water. It was sweet. We've got the test that when we bought the place, the potability test, it was suitable for everything. When our water went bad, it went bad essentially overnight when they had a workover rig back here, and it just plugged the filter in the wash machine and flooded the washroom and got the smell to it. And so it was just, our water was ruined. It's been bad ever since.
Pavillion has been identified as Wyoming's fracking ground zero. Like canaries in a coal mine, residents out here have cited clean water turning black and volatile gases emerging. With health problems doctors haven't been able to explain, some residents blame hydraulic fracturing, also known as fracking, a method injecting water, sand, and chemicals under high pressure down the well hole to break up deep, rock-locked gas reserves. An EPA study started in 2009 found industrial contaminants in 3 of the 39 wells in the Pavillion study area. The state and industry have disputed these findings. Even some neighbors say there's no problem here.
A letter from the EPA received July 27th of 2009. And the first thing I'm going to lay out here, there's 5 pages with 20 or 25 substances on each page of possible contaminants of any kind, whether from fracking, any kind of contaminants that they felt might be found in the ground, and none of these contaminants was found in your well. I'm not scientific, I'm not a scientist. All I know is what I know about this area, and that is that these wells have had natural gas components in them since the turn of the century.
Steve Hugas and John Martin are 2 neighbors speaking out.
The thing that makes this area unique is that we're sitting in the middle of a non-capped gas field, and so some of the gas migrates up into the sands, and some water wells run into that sand. Therefore, it gets gas in it. That was documented as early as 1951 on Bureau of Reclamation wells.
It comes out of the ground really cold.
They say the only problem is bad publicity.
You can taste the hardness.
And it's hurting the value of property.
Other than that, there's nothing wrong with it. The only thing wrong with Pavillion water is that everybody thinks there's something wrong with Pavillion water.
While there are a number of reasons for a water well to go bad, area drillers and geologists at the state engineer's office aren't aware of a history of good wells turning gassy.
That's what it looks like after about 3 days.
Having watched gas wells multiply in the area, Jeff Locker asks, where was the state in all of this?
I think the regulations are pretty much in place. But in all the drilling out here, whether it was the tribal minerals or fee minerals, which is oil and gas, and then tribals is BLM, never saw a single inspector from the state of Wyoming or from the BLM. They totally let industry, whether it's Tom Brown or Encana, police themselves.
One regulation calls for cement casing to run at least 150 feet below the deepest water well. But Jeff Locker found in the Oil and Gas Commission's own records that the well site nearest to his own domestic water well was cement cased 130 feet shallower than the depth he drew his water from.
Gave them a copy of their own records that showed where it was only surface cased. Nothing's ever been done to look at that well to see if it has any connection with my water or not.
After years of questioning why toxic elements have emerged in previously safe water, some believe officials charged with protecting health and the environment are in the pocket of industry.
The state of Wyoming, DEQ on gas, the state of Wyoming has never sampled my water.
When the EPA shared their test results with the lockers 2 years ago, they told them not to drink or cook with the water. And if they wanted to take a shower, they had to ventilate the room to disperse potentially flammable vapors. After years of sickness and medical tests, RHONDA is still waiting for an answer.
We're sick, something's gone wrong with our water, we can see it, we can smell it, we can taste it. We did not know that we were going to affect the neighbors in a way that we did. Someone needs to really say and look at whether or not this is going to be an effect all throughout where this industry takes this. And if it is, it's not a good place to be.
Before we begin, I do want to inform our viewers that Wyoming Chronicle invited representatives of the Environmental Protection Agency and Encana, the major company in the Pavillion gas field, to join our panel. They did decline our requests. But joining me in the studio, we have John Cora, Director of Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality, Deb Thomas, organizer of the Powder River Basin Resource Council, Bob King, the interim director of the Wyoming Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, and Dustin BLEIZEFFER, editor-in-chief of WYOFILE, and I might add a longtime energy reporter as well. Well, just before we begin, I'd like to start with this graphic from the U.S. Energy Information Administration. It's from December 2010, and it's a snapshot. It shows the top 100 U.S. gas fields in production. Wyoming has 2 of the top 10, 4 of the top 20. Nationally, the emergence of fracking has had an enormous and fairly recent impact. According to the Natural Gas Alliance, this country has more natural gas than Saudi Arabia has oil, more than a century's supply. That would really be energy independence, wouldn't it, John?
Well, we think Wyoming plays a big role. It is the nation's leading exporter of energy. You talk about oil and gas, but also coal and uranium. So our natural resources here in Wyoming are abundant.
Well, as with any kind of deal that seems too good to be true, is there a catch?
Well, with any energy development, there's an impact. And when you talk about whether it's coal mining, oil, or natural gas, a lot of the production areas are consolidated, pretty well consolidated and industrialized, at least for a period of time. So when you convert a prairie to an industrial zone, there are impacts.
You know, I don't think there's any doubt in anyone's mind that lives in Wyoming how important the oil and gas industry is to our state. I like to tell people right away that I represent people who have been severely impacted by development. And so I have a little bit different take than people who are not in that position. And unfortunately, those people don't see the benefits from oil and gas development. They see what happens when it goes wrong.
Well, the benefits, obviously, just to briefly reiterate, it's an enormous source of tax revenue for the state. We can look at well-financed schools and roads. Other side benefits, we actually have the second lowest electricity rate in the U.S. But it's a balancing act, isn't it?
It is, and in addition to the revenues, I think that we really have to pay attention to what the costs are for our state, for the other natural resources that we have in our state, particularly water, air, and public health.
Isn't it true, though, also that there's been a lot more application of fracking in recent years, you know, than there was in its early days?
Well, again, what we're finding is that the technique of fracking has been refined such that you're able to frack into tight sands and tight shales that in the past were uneconomic to develop. And the refining of the fracturing techniques and fluids and equipment has allowed the development of those reserves.
And that's what's opened up this new potential bonanza, as many have referred to it, including
that's
both
what
presidential candidates in this. You know, and there's also more recently been a history of testing, and of course, controversy, which follows the the revealing of any results. In 2010, the EPA did respond to complaints by some Wyoming residents and did some testing around Pavillion. Deb, you were actually a member of the group that went to Denver to talk to the EPA. What were you asking for?
The specific request that we made for Pavillion was that all of the water wells that we knew were impacted because people could see the changes in their water, smell it, taste it. We asked that all of those wells be tested using the same test methods. There had been some tests done, but they hadn't been the same test methods, and so it was really hard to tell if the contamination in each well was on its own contamination or if it was related. And also we asked that groundwater flow testing be done so that we could establish whether there was a plume that could be moving into other wells.
Well, that's a lot of technical sort of aspects, but there was also an aspect of you just looking for some attention, weren't you? I mean, you would not...
We were asking the federal government to take action when we didn't feel the state had.
It is safe to say that both with the residents up there were impatient and not happy with the slowness at which we were going at this, went to EPA, and quite frankly, we welcomed the EPA coming in. EPA has a huge number of technical resources at their disposal. They have a lot of money, and since then, I think the news stories would tell you this, that millions of dollars have been spent.
It's important to know that oversight of oil and gas drilling and water wells is divided among many different agencies. The residents of the Pavillion area that I talked to said that they'd been asking questions and they hadn't been getting answers for years.
It also comes down to understanding how the different agencies fit together, as Dustin said, and where people need to go for answers. And while we do a great job and have improved the coordination between federal agencies and the state agencies over the years, we are still working on that.
Well, but not to get too caught up in how government departments interact with each other. The fact is, as you saw in the video, that you've got somebody like Jeff Locker with a black filter every 3 days because he has really bad water. He's not alone in this, and it does lead to the question of what does an average citizen do who doesn't have attorneys, doesn't have lobbyists like the big companies do? Where do they turn if the state agency spends years not really getting them satisfaction?
Well, I think the question, if I can make it just slightly broader, first of all, residents come to us all the time, and we respond all the time. There are areas in which we can respond within our authorities and jurisdictions and do something about it, and there are limits to our authorities and jurisdictions.
I think it should be mentioned that as this Pavillion case was developing, the rest of the nation got introduced to hydraulic fracturing about the same time. Areas of the United States that were not as familiar with the oil and gas industry as we are in Wyoming. So there was a lot of concern outside of Wyoming in the eastern U.S., in Pennsylvania, New York, about hydraulic fracturing because they were just hearing about it.
Yeah, the New York governor has just called for a new round of public hearings because of the public pressure.
And so the oil and gas industry made a really strong stance. It drew a line in the sand and said there has never been one case of fracking contaminating drinking water. And frankly, they did a really poor job of relating this to the public because they drew the line in the sand. So now that they raised the stakes, now that there's an investigation going on in Wyoming, then there was a perception that, by God, they're not going to let this be that one case. So there's a matter of trust going on.
Well, Bob, I mean, isn't that when you just look at it from a sort of common sense point of view, even if the instances of, there was a home that exploded in Ohio, wells blowing up, they're rare, but they're real. And what are people to conclude when they hear the industry say there has never been a case? That sort of absolute.
Well, industry isn't, as I view it, drawing a line in the sand. I think they're stating a fact, because there indeed has not been a documented, proven case of hydraulic fracturing that has contaminated groundwater. Now, there are allegations, there may be evidence, depending on the strength of that evidence, but there's still investigation going on. Now, I think what industry perhaps has learned most from this whole experience is that if you go into an area, either on an exploration mindset or a development mindset to develop hydrocarbons, that this most effective way to evaluate what's going on is to get a base analysis of all of the groundwater and the surface waters that are out there before any drilling is done. That was not done at Pavillion, and generally has not been done industry-wide.
And you know, there's one other thing that I think we should really talk about or think about as a state, and that is industry is doing their job, because their job is to produce the product and make money. But what we need is a state government who will have good oversight over that industry, because that's what is going to protect the other resources and the public. So I don't think it should just be in terms of what industry wants or what's the most economically viable for industry. It should be about what is the best for our state as a whole, and for all our resources, including our people.
Well, no, I agree with that wholeheartedly, Deb, and I would have to say, though, that it's my experience and my opinion that the Wyoming Oil and Gas Commission, whose rules cover all the wells in the state. Now, we do have a memorandum of understanding with the Bureau of Land Management with respect to the federal lands, but I think the history of the Oil and Gas Commission, and I realize that there are some views that feel otherwise, but my view is that the Oil and Gas Commission has been very effective in regulating the industry and in setting rules and regulations that protect the human health and the environment, protect relative rights, prevent waste of the resource, which is its charge. I think overall it's thought of very highly.
I think it takes more than just managing and overseeing the industry. That's the way we were set up. What we don't have is a way to help landowners. You know, we don't have an agency that does that. We don't have an agency that can help investigate and thoroughly step in and help a community get its questions answered or protect them from pollution in the first place. I think, you know,
So far it's been not my department?
Well, a lot of our agencies were established 30 years ago and 40 years ago, and maybe haven't caught up with the technology or the nature of development these days. I just don't think the way we manage and oversee the industry is enough. There has to be some group of experts that can pull all the resources together to help out a community.
And also to really look at what the impacts are going to be to the other resources. That's not considered, or we wouldn't have the contamination issues that we have, and there's a bunch of them. We wouldn't have places like Pavillion, like Clark, like Deaver, and like the Jonah Field, where the other resources that we all depend on are at risk.
Well, again, I think some of those instances that you referred to can be identified with a specific failure of an equipment or failure of a process or something specifically with your Clark
It can, but I can tell you that I live in Clark, and I was there from the get-go before this round of development started there, and we made complaint after complaint after complaint after complaint to all the agencies asking that somebody come and look at what was happening and do something about it. And I want to say there are a lot of good people who are working within the agencies. I can't paint everybody with the same pen and say everybody's bad, because there's not. There's a lot of good people.
So you tried state agencies first before you ended up visiting
Absolutely.
Denver with the EPA?
For 5 years.
Well, and I guess I would...
6 years before we went to EPA.
I would say, too, that I think agencies are concerned with the public's issues. I agree that perhaps there's a perception, or there are times when it's not my responsibility. You need
or
to
mission,
call
really, because each agency has a mission.
But we get calls frequently at the Oil and Gas Commission, as John referred to, from landowners, and we try to address them as best we can, whether or not we have a specific rule or regulation that says, yeah, this is our charge or this isn't our charge. We're concerned about it. We don't.
But still we see these personal cases that have been profiled in the media, but they're real, of people just sort of hung up for years because there's nobody that can really step in and help them.
Well, no, and also before the major incidents happen, people who are living on the ground recognize changes in their environment and in their land that other people don't see. And so when they're lodging those complaints and saying there's a train that's going off the tracks, there needs to be better communication between the agencies and the people who are on the ground.
The important thing to note is that we do not in any way, shape, or form doubt those residents that something has gone wrong with their water. But when we go out and test it, we also need to understand where did that contamination come from. And that's the unanswered question. And I wanted to point out that the governor has directed all of us, Bob King and myself, to continue to work on this until we find the answers.
You know, the unfortunate part about this is for the people on the ground. And, you know, this has now become all about fracking, which it isn't all about.
Right.
It's about living with oil and gas exploration, drilling, development, and production. And there are a lot of problems. And, you know, if we could all get past the game of blaming fracking or industry not wanting to take responsibility for what could be their problem or their liabilities, then maybe the people who are actually on the ground suffering the consequences of what has gone wrong would not be in the position they're in.
Yeah, I mean, because typically Wyoming people don't like to complain.
These are not a bunch
there's
of
a
radicals.
long history of coexistence with the oil and gas industry here, and it's really more in recent years that we've heard of cases like this.
Hey, when your whole world is turned upside down, you are scared to drink your water, you have to get up 3 or 4 times a night to see if something's blowing up or running over or, you know, emitting something into the atmosphere that could affect you. You see your family getting sick, you have all kinds of strange diseases that you can't be explained no matter what doctors you go to. It's a very desperate situation.
How far ahead do you think we'll be in maybe 5 years on tackling some of these issues, hoping that other communities don't face the same issues as Pavillion has? John, what do you think?
I think we'll make great progress, and I base that on a couple of things. One is that I think the regulatory agencies have the attention of industry. There are many cases where industry has stepped up, and we do rely a lot on best available control technologies for controlling sources of pollution. A lot of that technology does emanate from that side, but they recognize that this is not a good place to be where we're always arguing over this stuff. We ought to be able to, when we see a problem, find a way to solve it more quickly than we have so far. And I think there's a lot of energy on that side. Now, on the policy side, I know there's a lot of energy for that. The governor of Wyoming has been very adamant about continuing to find out what we can and get science-based answers on Pavillion. And we're going to learn a lot from that, one way or the other. Whether I can guarantee that there won't be another problem, I would never do that. But what we can do is improve what we do have or control over. So I think we're going to get better.
Bob, what's your sense 5 years from now?
Well, I think you're going to see that industry as a whole realizes that proper regulation is not only required but needed and will benefit their industry, their company. They have to cooperate with the agencies in coming up with rules and regulations that are enforceable and realistic. And I think that you're going to see in 5 years that a much, as I said earlier, a better documentation of data before problems develop, so that when those problems develop, you have a better handle on how to come up with solutions. You're never going to have all your problems 100% addressed in any rule and regulation because those problems change over time.
Well, Deb, you've lived through this for some years now. What do you think 5 years from now?
Well, I have huge faith in people. And so I think that over the next 5 years, I think that people on the ground are going to, one thing is impact is everything. So I guess the good thing is more people that are impacted, more people will get involved, and I think they're going to start to demand better regulation put in place and better attention paid to what's happening on the ground before development even takes place, so that it's safer for all of the resources we depend
Probably
on.
a safe bet that there'll be even higher demand for natural gas 5 years from now.
Certainly
than
for
today.
water.
Yeah.
Certainly for water.
What do you think you're going to be writing about 5 years from now?
A lot of energy development in Wyoming, and probably a lot of these discussions. I think the industry has come a long way and will continue to improve its processes, and I think that communities, by necessity, are going to get engaged and collaborate on good planning in front, and insist on monitoring and insist on a responsive industry and a responsive regulatory environment. Really, a lot of our regulatory agencies have been playing catch up to an industry that has evolved and a technology that has evolved very quickly.
That, unfortunately, is the last word right now. We're going to have to thank John Cora, Bob King, Deb Thomas, and Dustin BLEIZEFFER. I'm Richard Ager, and do join us next time on Wyoming Chronicle.